Thank you so much. I wish I could have seen you saying it, but thank you so much for having me here. Um, I do want you to know that if you are typing or if you're making noise, I can hear it. So just know that. So thank you all for being here. I don't know how many of you there are or anything like that. I'd love to see your faces, but if that's hard to do, I understand. Thank you for being here because it's not always the easiest thing to show up for. People, they try to ignore this, ignore this part of life until it happens to them, and then they're kind of overwhelmed, not knowing exactly what to do. Fortunately, we come from a tradition that in many ways tells us what we need to do and holds us very tightly until we have figured it out for ourselves and can hold ourselves, and then gives us places each year so that we can return and contemplate what our losses have meant to us. And because of that, we get to participate in what I think is one of the most important tasks of mourning, which is finding a way to continue the conversation with people that we've lost, and in the process, continue the healing that might be necessary in that conversation. So I'm going to start with a blessing, and I'm going to sing it. And remember, I'm a rabbi, not a cantor, but I want you to hear these words. I said that the Jewish tradition gives us places for mourning, and places is a very important word when we talk about mourning, because the Hebrew word hamakom, which means the place, is a name for God. And I always think it's so clever, I don't know what the proper word is, but so appropriate that with all the different names that we have, the name of God that is given to mourners is one that is not defined. It's not prescriptive in any way. It is a place, and it lets us know that the place that we need to find might be quite individually determined, and it gives us the freedom to explore what that place might be. So I'm going to sing you Craig Taubman's version of the Mourner's Blessing, and then I want to talk about what it means, because I think it gives us such brilliant guidelines that go all the way back. Hamakom Yenachem, Yenachem Etchem, may the Holy One comfort you. Hamakom Yenachem, Yenachem Etchem, may our love surround you. Batoch sha'ar avalei Zion veYerushalayim. May the Holy One bring you peace, bring you love, and be a blessing. Hamakom Yenachem, Yenachem Etchem. May our love surround you. So the literal translation of that prayer is, may you find a holy place of comfort in the midst of others, or actually in the midst of the remnants who are the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And as I said, the word for holy place is hamakom. Am I frozen? Oh, you can, all right. Is hamakom. May you find hamakom, a name of God, in the midst of those who mourn Zion and Jerusalem. But I think that as time goes on, what this blessing has come to mean is, may you find a holy place of comfort in the midst of others who have known loss and learned compassion. And one of the things that I say a lot after people have recited the Kaddish is, may the one who makes peace in the high places find the cracks in our hearts that are created by loss, and channel into them the peace and the compassion that is the wisdom of the upper worlds, and allow us to become vessels to bring those things into into the world. Now, it doesn't happen all at once that we get to be those pure channels. It's a road that we must travel. And it begins with this blessing, because this is the blessing that is said as people walk from the grave. And traditionally it's done, people walk through two lines of people facing each other. It's called a shura, a line. And they say this blessing, Hamakom Yenechem. And they say it in such a way that it creates a kind of a model for how we should comfort people in the early days of grief, because it is a formulaic, non-intrusive way of letting people know that they're seen in their struggles, they're seen and they're blessed. At a time when they might be feeling very numb, and anything you might want to say or think you should say is very likely not gonna reach them. So by giving this beautiful, non-intrusive, formulaic blessing, we are really modeling this understanding that what people really need to do for mourners is just show up, and bless them. Now, this blessing is not a new one. It's actually a blessing from the time of the temple. And when the temple stood, there was a special path that was called the mourner's path. And everybody who had had any kind of loss, not just the death of someone, but any kind of loss, would walk that path. And the people in the community would say, Hamakom Yenechem. And it's interesting to know, that the Talmud says, who circles to the left, which means who walks the mourner's path? And the answer is the mourner, someone who has someone sick at home, someone who has been excommunicated, and someone who has lost a significant object. So if you put those in today, if you put those ways of being a mourner in the context of today, it is people who have lost someone through death, people whose financial situation has changed, people whose place in the community has changed, and I'm forgetting one of them. And someone who is dealing with illness, whether someone's sick at home, but it could be their own illness as well. So if you think about all of the losses that we have had, well, certainly right now in the last few years, I think so many people would fit on that within those categories of people who would be walking the mourner's path. And if we view each of those losses as deaths, different kinds of deaths, calling for different, perhaps, emotions. But if we were to give a ritual acknowledgement of all of the losses, little losses and big losses that people go through, people would be building their muscles. They would know that they had been through things before that have given them some wisdom and given them some strength and some guidelines for dealing with loss. What happens is, since we don't very often acknowledge the little losses, people are blindsided because they don't think they're prepared, when in fact they may have more wisdom than they're expecting. So I want to say one more thing about the mourner's path in the temple, because I think it's very significant, and then we'll go to the subject of the year of mourning, and I will say the year and beyond of mourning. The first, when King David envisioned the temple according to the Torah, he wrote the psalm that says, "You will turn my mourning into dancing." And the psalm was the psalm that he had written to be read at the dedication of the temple. So when he was envisioning the temple that he was not going to be allowed to build, he was envisioning a place where mourning turned into dancing. Now, here's a little important thing to know, because so many of us learn how to be Jewish in English. And because of that, there's a lot we don't get. In the Hebrew Bible, there are, I believe, 11 words, all of which translate into English as dance. And they all mean something different, but they all come across as dance. Well, the dance that David was envisioning for the temple was a ritual circle dance, often performed by women. It was the dance that Miriam and the women did when they got to the other side of the Sea of Reeds. It is a dance that we are told the righteous will do in the world to come. So this sense of a healing, celebratory, caring circle formed for healing was the vision that King David had for the temple, that it should be a place of caring, compassion, and dance. And according to the Bible, when Solomon dedicated the temple, he said, "Let it be a place where all who are suffering come." It was envisioned as a place of healing. And when I think about the fact that if we were to rewind time and include all the people who have roots on that mountain, all the Abrahamic religions, if we could all remember that we all started off in a place where the intention was an intention of healing, perhaps we could get through some of the difficulties that often seem insurmountable. So I wanted to ask you if you could. I'm going to talk for a while, and if you have questions that come up for you along the way, put them in the chat, and we'll address them hopefully at the end when we have time. So as I said, people walk from the grave, and they are blessed with this blessing. And it's appropriate because this is where the year of mourning begins. Up till the time of burial, the overarching value is kavod hamet, which means honoring the body, honoring the person who's died. But once the person has been buried, all the honor goes to the avelim, the mourners. So they come through these lines, and then they go to the place where Shiva is being held. And there they are fed by the communities. And very often they're fed round things like bagels or peas or lentils. Write in the chat if you know the reason that we eat round things in the house of mourning.
Does anybody have an answer so that I can
You can't write in the chat, can you? Never mind. All right, well, I know what you would write in the chat. If you were to write in the chat, you would say the cycle of life. And of course, you wouldn't be wrong, because of course, but according to the texts, that is not the reason we serve round things. There are two reasons, and they're so beautiful. One is that we're told that, like the pea or the lentil or the bagel or the egg, the hard-boiled egg, sorrow rolls. Today's mourner is tomorrow's comforter, and today's comforter is tomorrow's mourner. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing, which reminds us when we are in the house of Shiva, while we might feel some sort of pity or condescension, there is an opportunity to really recognize our own vulnerability and the fact that we are all in this together. And so we don't condescend to anyone. We recognize with awe, and awe, of course, in Hebrew has two sides. One is One is amazement, and the other is a little bit of trembling. And so we recognize that we are all in this place where we are vulnerable. I often tell people that one of the reasons we go to a funeral is not just to honor the people or to, the person who died or to comfort the mourner, but to also begin to come to terms that with the fact that we too are vulnerable, we too are mortal. So I think that that's present also in the house of Shiva. Anyway, I asked you a question, and now I haven't been giving you the answer. The second textual reason that we serve round things at the house of Shiva is because it says, like a pea or a lentil, the mourner has no mouth. And in fact, one of the purposes of Shiva is for the mourner to be able to find his or her or their mouth. Oh, thank you very much. To help the mourner be able to find the words or the sounds, really the sounds first, and the words later, that will be needed in order to be able to face what has to be faced. So how does a mourner find their mouth? Well, the Kaddish is the beginning. In the house of Shiva, the mourner stands for Kaddish, and it's often kind of a miracle to find your way from the Yit Gadol to the final Amen. It's black letters on a white page, and you just have to get through it. The Kabbalists speak. I'm going to see if I can lift this to some extent. No, I'm not sure. I can't find it. So I can feel like I'm looking you in the eyes. But I don't seem to be doing that. So the Kabbalists speak of four worlds in which we live, and we live in all of them, in which our souls live. One is the physical world, the world of Asiya, the world of doing things, making things, very tangible. The second is the emotional world, that is the world of Yetzirah. The third is the world of Beriah, which is an intellectual world, the world where ideas are formed. And the fourth is Atzilut, a world of spirit, the world of spirituality, where we're very, very close to the shimmering mystery that is also called God, or Hamakom. So I'm going to take a little detour now and talk about the Kaddish, because the Kaddish are the words that the mourner says when they begin to find their mouth. And the role of the community is not unlike their role when they were saying Hamakom Yenechem. The role of the community in the house of mourning is to be present and to be quiet, to wait for an indication from the mourner that it is time to speak, and to speak very little, perhaps to tell a story about the person who has died, but not to fix it. Not to fix it. You can't fix it. So just recognize that the mourner is in a world. Actually, I'm looking at the background of my picture here. The mourner is kind of in a world that looks like that. It's sort of fuzzy, hazy, and kind of mystical. So, don't put too many words into it. Just be there. Be there, bring some food, and say Amen. So in the world, the Kaddish is said in all four of those worlds, those Kabbalistic worlds that I just described. The first one being the physical world. So in the physical world, the Kaddish is a place to show up at a time when you're living in this kind of a haze, It's a place that says, okay, you stand here, and I'm going to say Amen. You read these words, and when I say Amen, I am signaling to you that I am holding the tethers. Healing happens in a mysterious place. It's not a place you can begin to imagine while you're standing here in this haze. But I will hold the tethers as you begin the journey to that mysterious world, so you will know that your community is there for you, and I am here for you. And you can take the risk of going to that mysterious world and trying to encounter all of the things that await you on the mourner's path. So that first place, that physical world, is simply a place to stand with a script, words to say, food to eat, and people there to support you. So then after a while, when one gets a little bit more confident in that world, you begin to look at the Kaddish in the emotional world, the world of Yetzirah. And the Kaddish is like, it's like a wireless communication between the worlds. On the wings of the Kaddish, we have the opportunity to express all the things that we meant to say all the things we meant to say, perhaps that we couldn't have said. Perhaps the person couldn't have heard them, couldn't hear them, either physically or emotionally. It's an opportunity to work out to say all the unfinished things, and to be able to wait. We're told in the Talmud that if not for the people on the other side praying for us, this world would not exist for a moment. And I take from that an understanding that we're still in some way dynamically connected. And so, as I said, on the wings of the Kaddish, we have the opportunity to continue the conversation. One of the biggest challenges, and perhaps the most important task that we have as mourners, is to take the physical conversation and turn it into a spiritual conversation. To have a relationship with someone who was here with us in the flesh, who we could taste and smell and love and all of those wonderful things, and to have it become something spiritual. And as I said, the Kaddish can take us there. On the wings of the Kaddish, we begin that work. We don't have to do it all at once. We have the rest of our lives to do that healing, but that's how we begin. So the third world, the world of Berea, up until now, the Kaddish has been black words on a white page. It's been a wireless communication, but all of a sudden you look at the words and you begin to wonder. If someone has suffered before their death, if the death was a shock, if the death was whatever it might have been, the words of the Kaddish don't always make sense. If you look at them and you say, why would I want to fill the world with this great name? This great name, also known as God, has just betrayed me. This great name has made someone good suffer. This great name is making me suffer. I'm not so sure that these words make sense. And so this is a liminal space for the mourner in which I like to say, the Bob Dylan song, knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. The Kaddish is a crowbar for knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door and asking all of those existential questions. Why do good people suffer? Why do bad things happen to good people? What kind of God would cause these terrible things to happen? So we ask those questions, like Job asked those questions, demanding an answer. We don't necessarily get an answer, but at some point after all of our knocking, we hit a sweet spot. And we learn to live with the mystery. We're in a different place. Having the answers don't matter quite as much as they did in the beginning. I think that, well, I tell my students who are studying to be rabbis and cantors and chaplains that one of our biggest tasks is to help people live in a world of mystery, to make peace with the fact that the most important questions are very rarely answered, and that our job as human beings is to find a way to live in a world where there are no answers to the biggest questions. I mean, some people react to that by becoming fundamentalists and being very clear about what happens and why it happens. Job's friends said, you must have done something wrong. You must have done something to deserve this because God wouldn't punish you. And Job knew that he hadn't done anything to deserve it. And he was angry. And his anger ultimately opened up the world. His knocking at heaven's door allowed him to have a much bigger picture and live with the mystery. And I think that's a lot of what the work of Kaddish allows us to do and what the work is of grief. So that was a detour to kind of give you an overview of what the Kaddish will do, not immediately, but over time. But the work begins in the house of Shiva. And then we walk around the block at the end of the week of Shiva. We leave the house, we walk around the block, and it can be quite jarring because the world, is kind of going on the way it was before. It doesn't seem to be as radically altered as our inner world. When my father died in New Orleans, it was we buried him and it started raining and it kept raining, and it hadn't rained like that in 500 years. Before Katrina, this was the biggest rainfall. Well, Katrina was not rainfall, it was the levee broken, but this was a major, major rainfall. Actually, a couple of people who came to be with us for Shiva ended up having to spend the night because their cars were flooded on the street. But anyway, when I walked out from the house of Shiva after the week, the world was upside down. I had to climb over branches and trees and everything like that. And it was very comforting because the world the outer world looked like my inner world. But, I wouldn't recommend that. It wasn't a great experience. But we began to move back into the world. I encourage people to continue wearing the black ribbon that is given to them at the funeral, because I think you all are aware of the fact that we're given a ribbon. Traditionally, we're supposed to tear a garment, the garment that we're wearing when we hear about the death. But in fact, we don't do that anymore. So we get these little ribbons. And these ribbons are supposed to be placed over our heart to expose the heart. And when we wear them in public, it signals to other people that something's going on with us. And sometimes people will ask, but sometimes people will see it and they'll give you a little space. I think it's a very helpful thing to do. I encourage people to wear it for the first month. The first month is, at the end of the first month, people usually take off their ribbons. And there's something called shloshim, and shloshim is 30 days. And it's a time, I think, that mourners are emerging from this fog, and they can hear other people. They can hear the words that you might want to say. I think it's a good time for a memorial service or just for people to get together and remember together the person who died, because I think that the mourner's numbness has begun to wear off, and they can hear the voices. Also, very often, after someone's died at the beginning, people are all attentive, and about a month later, sometimes people will say to me, nobody talks about her anymore. they've forgotten her, and I'm supposed to get back to normal. Well, very rarely are people ready to get back to so-called normal. So it's a good time to remind people that you remember the person who's died. So then the next significant milestone on the mourner's path, although one would hope that they continue saying the Kaddish so that they can rise through all of those four worlds while everybody holds the tether with their Amen. I'll tell you, let me take another detour and tell you what happens when you don't take the time to mourn. What happens so often is, I just read an article, I think it was in the New Yorker, called Grievance versus Grief. And grievance is that place where we're angry, that place where grief activates our anger, our hurt, our rage that life is the way it is, our rage that all the things that I spoke about before in terms of the world of Berea. I think a lot of people get stuck there because when people can feel that anger, they're able to really express themselves again. And so they do. And very often they get into trouble. Ideally, we continue to grieve until our anger has taken us to another place. I think that one of the reasons that wars just ricochet through the generations is because once people get to that place of anger, they want to go out and do something instead of waiting for the step of grief, which is, well, the last stage of grief, people say is acceptance, but I don't think it is. I think it's coming to peace. It's coming to a place of compassion, perhaps even a place of activism, but activism that is born from compassion, not from anger. So that's the place we'd like to reach. And very often people don't continue saying Kaddish, they don't continue their mourning process until they get to that place. And so it's a troubled world out there. So the unveiling happens, let me look at my watch. The unveiling happens, usually it happens around 11 months. And I don't know if you all know why 11 months. It's because it is believed that when we say Kaddish for someone, they go through a kind of purgatory. And they are cleansed of all their misdeeds during the course of their lifetime. And the longest you can stay in that purgatory is a year. So people say, I'll just say it for 11 months, because I don't want to say that the person needs the full tenure of time in purgatory. So just to be on the safe side, I'll say it for 11 months. But I won't say it for 12 months. Anyway, at the unveiling, very often, people have lived through what we now call a year of magical thinking. The belief that at 11 months, at the time of the unveiling, at the time of the first yard site, that things should be better, that the scab has formed, and what happens instead is that very often that scab is ripped away. The unveiling can very often be like the funeral without the numbness. Or people have that magical feeling that they'll be back to normal, when of course, if there ever was a normal, things have remained different and will continue different. And the burden of grief still rests heavily. In fact, the first year we are marked as mourners by the tradition. The second year, we get into, we're no longer called mourners, and we realize that in some ways we need to take care of ourselves in a way that may in some ways be a little more difficult. As I said, healing comes from a place that you can't imagine. And it doesn't look like what you might have thought it would have looked like. And if you write a script about it, what it should look like or what it will look like, you'll either be very disappointed, or if you've said, I'll never get over this, and you've written a script about it, very often you will get caught in that script. The real challenge is to be curious and to be open, and not to define what healing will look like, but to allow yourself to be taken to that mysterious place that I spoke about earlier, and allow yourself to be transformed and to come into another understanding of what it means to be human, what is possible in relationships once you allow yourself to admit that this physical relationship is ended, but a spiritual relationship is also a possibility. Healing can look very different than what you may have thought. And if you're open to it, if you're open to the possibility of it, I'm trying to create some macombs here, opening up places of curiosity that will allow you to step through this chasm and come to another sense of what is possible in the world. The yard site is the next day on the mourner's path. And I want to tie the yard site, well, I'll just say a couple things about yard site, because some years yard sites pass and you almost don't notice. Other years, and they can be decades after the loss, the heart is opened up and you might feel it as if it were yesterday. The thing that we are taught, and I'm going to tell you how we're taught, is that there are places on the calendar to which we can bring our grief. There's the day of Yahrzeit and the 4 days of Yizkor. And while, of course, anniversaries, birthdays, days of anniversaries of diagnoses, all of those things, we may have our hearts broken open again. The teaching is that let's really go for it. Let's really go back to being mourners this day and make a place for it. Because if we allow ourselves to feel the loss, then we will go to another place. The only feelings that don't go away, I believe this, are the feelings that we don't allow ourselves to feel. And by creating these 4 days of Yizkor and the Yahrzeit as days when we are in some ways instructed to feel, we are given places we're given rituals that hold us and allow us to express the feelings of mourning so that we can essentially flush them through our systems. Because, a good cry, it may not be fun, but at the end of it, I think most of us feel a lot better. I think it's true of a lot of deep feelings. We allow ourselves to feel them, and then they change. The things that don't change, as I said, are the things that we rigidly hold. Like, I won't cry because I'll never stop crying, and so the tears are inside you for the rest of your life. Or I am so angry, I'm not going to let it out because I will just burn down the world. Very often that anger will be encoded in all of your cells, and you'll go through through the rest of your life as a very angry person. But wait, there's more. Let me talk a little bit about Yizkor, because Yizkor, I think, is the most brilliant of our rituals, of our morning rituals, because it allows us to acknowledge that the conversation continues year after year after year. It continues and it changes. And if you look closely on the 4 days of mourning, the 4 days of Yizkor, you will see that each of those days is connected with a specific task of grief. And so as we go, and I'll explain what those are, but as we go through them year after year, we put our foot in each of these different tasks, and we see how we have grown, and we see how the conversation has continued and changed as time goes on, which is, I think, a very heartening thing. So let's just quickly look at the year of the year of Yisker as a way of continuing as a remarkable tool for continuing the conversation and healing the relationship and bringing our physical connection to a spiritual connection in a satisfactory way. So the first day on which we say the Yisker prayer is Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur has many themes, but two of them that I want to mention are certainly the work of unfinished business with people, of going to people and saying, you know, I did this, I'm sorry, I wish I had done it better. Will you forgive me? The making of amends. So it's an opportunity to look at those things in the relationship that we wish we had done better. It's also called Yom HaKippurim. And we're told that one of the reasons, that's a plural, so it's not just our atonements, or our realignment, I think is a better word. It's also, we're told that the souls of those who are gone also have the opportunity to make an atonement. So again, this sense of a dynamic relationship continues, and the conversation continues, and we get to heal. The other thing, at the beginning of Yom Kippur, the first thing is, of course, what's the matter with me? Kol Nidre. Just post a cancer. It could be my age or the fact that I'm just getting over breast cancer, but my memory's not the greatest. We asked to be released from vows. So what are vows with regard to mourners? Sometimes when somebody dies, we get really wedded to a belief that if we had done something differently, things would have been different. If I had called another doctor, if I had not left the room, that's very common, because a lot of times people can't let go when the people they love are in the room. But people, they leave the room for 1 minute to get a drink of water or a cup of coffee, and that's the time that the person dies. And then they go through life saying, if only I hadn't left the room, I wasn't with them when they needed me. In fact, they may have needed you to leave the room. But people hold on to these ideas that are just ideas, but they become vows. And so on Yom Kippur, we have an opportunity to look at the vows that we've made in our mind with respect to the person who's died, to their death, or even promises we may have made that are impossible to fulfill. Let's look at those on Yom Kippur and see if we can soften them and perhaps release ourselves from them. The second day of Yisker is everybody's favorite holiday, Shemini Atzeret. How many of you celebrate Shemini Atzeret? It's actually a pretty great holiday, because one of the most significant things about it is it's the day that the liturgy changes, and we begin to pray not for dew, but for rain. And of course, in terms of mourning, rain, the necessary rain that the earth needs in order for seeds to germinate, is the necessary tears that we need to shed that soften the rocks inside of our heart and allow us to become more porous and alive to life again. Those tears are necessary. There's a legend about Shemini Atzeret, and it is that Sukkot was this fabulous festival, and people came from all over the ancient world to be part of it, whether or not they were part of the Israelite community, because it was just so great. And so then on the seventh day, they all went home. But the legend says that God, who was said to have lived in that place, said to the Israelites, to the family, to the mishpacha, don't go, stay another day. And Shemini Atzeret means the 8th day of gathering. So that sense of yearning, that sense, oh, please, I wish you didn't leave. Those tears that we need to feel, those are the themes of Shemini Atzeret. The recognition that there's what to cry about. The die has been cast, and we need to just find a way to let the tears flow and recognize that we are powerless in the face of some of the great mysteries. The 2 other days, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. The 2 other days on which we say the Yizkor prayer are Pesach, and the themes of Pesach with regard to grief there's many, but the theme of freedom and even some ambivalence about our freedom. How are we still living in someone else's land? How are we moving into freedom to be ourselves and not in homage, in service to our grief? Are we ready? We may not be ready. We have these days come and go for the rest of our lives, but how ready are we to move on? And it's just questions about freedom that we need to ask ourselves. And there's no right or wrong answer because, as I said, these days come again. And finally, Shavuos is the last day that we say Yizkor, and that's a lovely one because what was the Torah of the relationship? What were the gifts? What were the things that we treasure about having been involved with this person who we've lost? And, some years, all we want to say is good things about them. All we want to say is what the gifts were. And some years, there's unfinished business that comes up. And we need to really dwell in the Yom Kippur template. But we have the opportunity each year to explore these 4 sides of grief and to move forward through them again and again as we grow, as our relationships continue to grow and change, and as we continue the conversations with the people we have loved or lost. So thank you. I'll stop there, and hopefully you've got questions for me.
Thank you, Anne. I'm going to talk from the back because we're having some tech problems. But does anybody have a question? And if so, would they like to come up so Anne and speak into the computer so Anne can hear the question? Any questions? Anne, I think they're all stunned by the poetry and how fluent you are about all of this. I was sitting next to Hazan Waishar, and we were both just saying it's like instant poetry.
Oh, thank you.
No questions by anybody? Okay, Hazan Waishar will ask you a question. Ask it loud so everyone can hear.
Okay. So, Anne, we're about to get into a week of holiday dinners with our families. And some people in our families are comfortable talking about these things, and some people are not. Do you have any suggestions for situations when you've been with family who don't speak as eloquently about mourning as you do?
If I do. I think it's important to acknowledge that they're not there. And some people go as far as setting a place for them, or lighting a candle for them. I think maybe people are a little afraid of what happens when they open up that what they think is a Pandora's box. I'm more afraid of what happens when you don't, the things that we hold inside. So I think we have to normalize our tears, we have to normalize our anxiety, and we have to say, Seder was, I'm looking around the room at pictures of people who used to be at my Seders and aren't anymore. And I'm feeling chill go through my body, but it's a chill of love, and I want to make a space for that. Um, so it's hard. It's hard when people have different ways of dealing with it, but I think people are usually grateful when a macomb, when a place is created where they can acknowledge what's really going on.
Any other questions?
If not, oh, good, oh, good. I do have a poem and I do have some music we can end with, but I'd rather hear questions, so. Mm.
Take my seat. This is Martin.
Hi, thank you very much for your very clarifying, number of clarifying points, and also I wish you well in your own personal medical needs.
Oh, thank you.
You learned earlier tonight that between the time of that you're first notified of the death of a loved one and you either rent your dress or you hair a ribbon, you're supposed to not cry, and you're supposed to prepare for the burial. And at the time of the burial, then it's okay to cry. And it sounds like, yeah, I see you're looking like that. It would seem to me appropriate, and I've had friends who lost tragically people very close, and I mean it is an immediate impact, and to think that you could avoid that, or
Yeah, I don't think you can legislate things like that. I think what happens during that time is we're told that's not a time to call people. That's a time for leaving the family alone, because not only do they have to take care of things, it's not, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I mean, what good is that going to do, during that time? It's really a time to leave people alone, but not to tell them how to feel. I mean, the whole thing is never to tell anybody how to feel, but just, there's actually, I don't remember them off the top of my head. I think they're in my book. But there's actually a time, certain times you're not even supposed to say, how are you? And then there's certain times when it's okay to say, how are you again? But during that period it's called ananut, which is the first stage of grief. It's basically a time to really back off and let the family be. But of course they're going to cry, or maybe not, because they may be in such shock. I don't know I don't know who taught you that or who I'm contradicting, but it doesn't make sense to me.
just nice to know that our faith gives you an opportunity to go through these grieving periods and is very much aligned with I guess, the psychology of grief and through the ages.
Well, it's brilliant, and I have to say, I mean, nobody becomes a specialist on grief because of of easy times, when I went through some very significant grief in my early 20s, when my mother committed suicide, and then my sister died in an accident, a real freak accident, three months later. I didn't know about this stuff. And I did what I needed to do, and I did all these things, but I didn't do them in a context, and so it took a lot longer. And when I began to live in a more observant Jewish community again, I saw that I would have been, if these things had been observed, it might have been a lot easier. Yeah. Thank you.
I think we've at the end of our time, and I'm so sad, because I feel like this has been a chance to visit with you and glean some of the amazing things you wrote about and taught about in other places. But I want to thank you so much for being here with us, sort of, kind of, really, barely.
I know. I love to say to people, I have to go. I have to teach in Maryland. Do I have time to read one more thing?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. So this is something I wrote about the Kaddish. I wish we had time for me to tell you when I wrote it and why, but when we mourn, we strain our ears, listening for the voice of the deceased until we hear that voice coming from our own hearts. Mourners, we yearn to continue the conversation. We search for the unsaid words and to resolve the unfinished issues. The Kaddish can take us there. Kaddish parts the curtains and forces open the space between the worlds, breaking open the crevices where the voices still come through and where all the worlds are one. For the price of our yearning, our anger, and our tears, the Kaddish will carry us beyond the edges of the world we know. It takes us to a place of wholeness, of peace, where all the polarities dissolve, where life and death, black and white, male and female, God and not God merge, become one. Adonai Echad. The words of the Shema become the reality of the world. Kaddish ends exile. It suffuses the most profane regions with the holiness of God's name and rests in Amen from the place it has not yet been forthcoming. The Amen we may have been listening for our entire lives. That Amen sustains the world. So thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Let me just say a little commercial. If you buy the book, and you don't need to buy the book, but if you do, make sure you get the red one because it's got so much more than the previous two iterations, which they're still selling on Amazon. So, but go for the red one, not the purple one. All right, my dears. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.